Well, good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, audience, whenever you are listening to this. It is your host, Tim. I'm excited today. I have two amazing guests. Austin to my right. Austin, how are you doing in 3 words?
Better than I deserve. That's 4. Dang it.
No, that's all right. I didn't warn you I was doing that. All right. And then to my left, Michelle, how are you doing?
I'm so good. I'm so relieved. I'm sure we all are with the smoke being gone.
So is that how we're starting this?
And the
3
weather
words?
cooler.
Definitely a word count.
I didn't get a limit on words.
Yeah.
Yes, a word count on the guy who goes on an average of 3 hours when he teaches.
Whoa. I was gonna say Michelle should just talk more, but now I'm gonna hijack this entire thing now.
Oh, good.
Just
all
for
right.
you.
Right on par. Cool. No.
I'm kidding.
Well, yes, you mentioned it. Today, for many reasons, is a very special day. So, listeners, don't mean to blow your minds, but this gets released on a Wednesday, but we record on a Tuesday. A couple things happening on this Tuesday. Beautiful temperature. I mean, I don't know if temperature can be beautiful.
Perfect.
It is like under 80 degrees. There is no smoke outside. And for me personally, it is my mom's birthday. Happy birthday, Mom, if you're listening. I am not sharing the age because she would not like that. But Mom, my number one fan, happy birthday. I hope you enjoy it. Yeah, and you're probably not listening to this on your birthday, so that's good.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Are you doing anything fun?
No.
Oh, shoot. Put on the spot.
I saw
no.
Mom today.
Okay.
I'm a bad son. We'll do lunch, Mom. We'll do lunch, and you have it on video. So.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Everybody wins with that.
Yeah.
Well, all right. So first off, what I want to address. I really don't mean to be making this all about me, says the guy with his face in the mug. But my wife, Rachel, was on the Weekly this week, and it was with Grandma Ruth. Shared a little bit of the story of how we met Grandma Ruth through quarantine. Super fun, super awesome. And just wanted to use that opportunity to highlight how important, to use 2 long words, multi-generational relationships are. Just young learning from old learning from young, the in-betweens learning from everybody. So I'm going to take a few minutes before we get into what Paul is saying in Philippians. How has fellowship with people in other age demographics affected your guys' life? Start, ladies first.
Yeah, well, I love that even just that you said that it goes both directions. Because I can attest to that. I mean, I just love having my younger friends and what I learned from them, and but then also through my life, and still have had older people in my life that can mentor me, or have gone ahead on some things maybe that I'm struggling with that they can help me out with. So yeah, I think it's great. And Grandma Ruth, she said it best when she said that that's what the church family is all about, is just blending together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. I think when I look at my walk with the Lord, and even in my journey of becoming a Christian, I think one of the most special things that I've experienced is the multi-generational cross-pollination that takes place inside of the body of believers. When I first came on staff here at River Valley, one of the coolest things was how many of the members of staff kind of mentored me in a very official/unofficial way. And yeah, the level of wisdom that you can just kind of pluck from people that are older than you and wiser than you, and who've been down many different roads and paths in their life, is so important. And then likewise, I feel like, at CAD, you can probably speak into this as well, but even interacting with some of the kids that maybe just, accepted Jesus as their Savior, or are just beginning to kind of form their walk with God, is also so kind of mentoring to me. It reminds me of kind of the sweeter and simpler days of just Jesus and you. And so it's important to be able to... It's a fresh
perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, to be able to kind of look back and look forward and see how God is working in people's lives from different ages, different perspectives, and different journeys.
Yeah, I don't think I know for a fact our church wouldn't thrive with one age demographic. So yeah, an encouragement. If you are young listening to this, reach out to somebody with more years in their life, learn from them. If you have a lot of years in your life, reach out to somebody who's younger. We need it. So
totally,
definitely,
couldn't agree more.
Well, let's get to talking about somebody who just had a lot of life in him in general. We're talking about Paul, again, the author of the letter. So, Austin, I'm slinging this first one to you, and we're just going to unpack Paul, unpack his resume.
Yeah.
I like to give a little, like to try and create some context on this episode, obviously. So, Paul, obviously, he's known in the church. He's known in the Christian community. What is his reputation, or what is he known outside of the church? Yeah. So that's kind of the first question. And then I want to talk about why that resume he shares in 5 and 6 is so important.
So, yes, I think he was. I do think that Paul would have been a figure in society. And one of the reasons I say that is because back in this ancient Roman culture, religion played a huge role. Philosophy played a huge role in the culture of that time. In the marketplace, people would sit together, they would talk, they would debate, they would argue, they would discuss different ways to view life, different ways to process deep thoughts. And the Jewish people had a seat at that table, along with other philosophers and thinkers of the time. And so it's very likely that Paul would have been one of the leaders of the Jewish community at the table, at the marketplace, discussing different ideas philosophically at that time. So to answer the first question, do we think Paul was known? 100%. I definitely think he would have been someone that walking through the marketplace, people would have recognized. In fact, even in Acts 17, we see on Mars Hill when Paul was debating with the Epicurean, Stoic, and Sophist philosophers. And so he probably knew these guys. He probably, sat and had some drinks with them and discussed different ideas about philosophy or way of thinking, logic, reason, all that kind of stuff. So first question, yes. I do think that Paul would have been someone that people in this society would have recognized, even outside of the church.
Okay, recognized and then real quick, respected?
So depends on which Paul. Are we talking about Saul or are we talking about Paul?
Ooh, let's go Paul.
So I think Paul. I think Paul had a really interesting life as far as receiving praise and adulation from society. I think when Paul was Saul, before he met Jesus on the road to Damascus, I think that Paul would have been revered. I think that he would have been honored and respected by a lot of Jewish people and even by other philosophers of the time. He was a zealot. He was passionate about what he believed in, so much so that he was willing to persecute the church. And so I think that he would have been respected by all people on that account. But then when he became Paul, I know this, that he would have been rejected by the predominant Jewish community. And probably still had a seat at the table for the other philosophical world. But so yes and no. I think he would have been respected by general society, but also I think he would have been hated by the Jewish predominant culture at that time because he transitioned from being a tribe of Benjamin, circumcised, eighth day, all that kind of stuff to I'm following Jesus.
Yeah, change teams. Just the other side of the court.
Totally. Yeah.
Anything to add to that?
Well, just that he educated, and you kind of alluded to that, and being a Roman citizen. Mm-hmm. So it just goes along with what Austin is saying, that he would have just had this platform, I think, in that culture and been well-educated and well-known.
Yeah.
So.
Even his teacher, Gamaliel, he was a respected thinker of the time. And so, you think it, right, like Aristotle, Plato, or, I think that's right. I don't know, maybe I'm confusing one of them. But many times teachers and their students were linked together. And Gamaliel was a very famous, influential teacher of the time. And so it would be very likely that Gamaliel could have pointed a lot of people to his pupil, Paul, and talked and discussed about how Paul was an up-and-comer. He was a smart dude in Jewish philosophy and whatnot.
All right. On that, one more thing about Paul. Interesting thing he says, and when he's trying to share this resume, I was so zealous that I persecuted the church. Do you just want to kind of unpack maybe why he would have said something like that? Because it sounds like a really weird phrase to say, but why would he have said something like that?
Well, yeah, so zealous. I mean, you talked about this week as well. So, yeah, kind of sidebar. I did not teach this weekend. Pastor Tim taught over here in Rogue River. So as much as he's the one asking the questions, he's got a lot of answers as well. That's what I'll say.
Yes, but
so zealous, yeah. I mean, it's this idea of passion, right? It's this idea of burning hot for something. And I think this is a danger when it comes to religious zeal. Whatever it is, when you get passionate and lit up by something, sometimes your passion can get misplaced. And so Paul was passionate to the point of persecution, meaning that he was at the nth degree of his passion and his zeal for Judaism, for the Jewish culture. So much so that he would go to any length to defend that way of belief or that way of thought, to the point of trying to silence and persecute those who had a different view than him. So I think when he talks about being zealous to the point of persecution, he's saying, I was so lit up, so passionate, so on fire for what I believed was truth, I was willing to defend it at all costs, no matter the circumstance.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's there.
Yeah, no, other than that, he lists that almost in his resume. So I think in a sense, he kind of saw that as not necessarily a bad thing. Although I see what you're saying about if we can get so zealous about something that we just lose perspective. And but it's interesting to me that he lists that as almost being part of his resume, like it should be something that would have been considered a good thing. And I think at the time he thought it was too. He was so on fire for God And as a Hebrew of Hebrews and all those things, that he felt it his duty maybe to even do that. And then when he meets Jesus, it all just gets inverted. Mm-hmm.
And that's actually a really good addendum, Michelle, especially going into what this week, Paul, sometimes we forget that this was one letter. This was like one big thing. And even when you get into this upcoming week and the section immediately following what he just said, he even talks about that, how as Christians, we're not supposed to be idly sitting by, but we're supposed to be pressing on, looking, but forgetting what is behind and pressing towards the goal, which is in Christ Jesus. And so I think that's a great addendum, great thought that, it's like, no, we still should be passionate, but what are we being passionate for?
Yeah. No, exactly. Well, all right. So we're going from context to conviction, possibly. So Michelle, sending this one to you. I read things where he says, all things are like garbage when it comes to knowing Christ. So do you think that, and again, I'm being very broad, that we as Christians do a good job regarding all things as garbage when it comes to Christ? And even a follow-up question is, do you think that if we were to truly 100% live as Paul charges us to, that we would be able to operate and function in America, in the United States that we know and live in?
Right. Well, I'll address that second one first, I guess, because I think that, yes, I think that the gospel certainly is not confined to any one particular culture or time. Mm-hmm. So absolutely, we have some unique things maybe that he didn't have. Certainly I think our individualism and we just can have this tendency to feel like we can take care of things. Kind of the self-sufficient kind of an American attitude, I think, can get in our way. And thinking about this, he's. I think it makes sense to again restate that when he used that word garbage or refuse, that it was actually a crude expletive. Mm-hmm. That Paul is feels so strongly about this that he uses a very strong word. There's other places in this section too where he's just very strongly wording.
Oh, he was jacked up in this. He was just ready to fight somebody.
Yeah, and I think I think the point it's helpful to make is that these things in and of themselves aren't necessarily bad things, right, but they got in the way of his relationship with Jesus. Mm-hmm. So as I'm thinking through this question, that's kind of what comes up for me. He repeatedly talks about wanting to know Christ. We hear that from Paul a lot, that he wants to know Christ. And this letter was written, maybe 30 years after the Damascus experience. So this is coming from a man who has known Jesus for decades, and he still has this burning passion that he wants to know Jesus even more than he already does. Mm-hmm. So that right there also, to me, is just a good word for all of us that maybe have walked with the Lord for a long time. Do we still burn with that desire to know Jesus even more than we already do? And then the question that came to my mind then is what, maybe is in my life, and maybe we can each ask ourselves, what's in our life that maybe it's a good thing, but maybe it's getting in the way of my relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
Of knowing the Lord, or maybe I'm placing a legalistic thing. I think we so easily tend toward legalism, with ourselves or with other people. And so again, just kind of as Christians, and these aren't one-time questions. I think we need to, part of that walking out our faith is routinely double-checking our heart and our lives and asking ourselves these things kind of on a regular basis. Like, okay, Lord, what, show it to me. What do I have in my life that's getting in my way of knowing you more?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a very, very wise thought there, Michelle. Martin Luther used a phrase in Latin called incurvatas ense, and it's this idea of the natural inclination that we have as humans to curve in on ourselves and try to find things that we can take from society that we think are going to amount to something super special and powerful, mystical and spiritual, but in the end they don't fulfill. And so, no, I think you're totally right. I think legalism is one of those things that distracts us. We are idol factories. We really are. Like the human condition is that of creating idols after idol after idol after idol. And I think one of the tricks that the enemy uses is taking good things that God created and then making them God things, right? So it's like food is a good thing, but excess of food turns into gluttony, and that's not honoring God. And so, he's very sly and he's very secretive, but if we can keep our eye on that and understand the way that he does maneuver and manipulate, we perhaps can get out a little bit more unscathed than other ways, than other words. But
I also thought it was interesting to note that his use of the terms gain and loss, those are accounting terms. So he's talking about, when he first lists these things and as credits basically on his account, so that whole resume of his, these things, and these are credits to him. And then when he meets Jesus, they don't just become neutral, they actually flip over into the deficit column.
Yeah.
And because again, they are disrupting his ability to really know God and know Jesus. So I thought that was interesting that he used that accounting terminology.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. I didn't know that. He's a smart dude. He talked about sports, finances, accounting. Yeah. Goodness gracious.
Well, and what I love, and I talked about this at Rogue River a little bit, is that Paul used harsh words, but he knew exactly what he was saying when he wasn't just saying like, oh, I'm going to regret that, like we say from up front sometimes, like, oh, shouldn't have said that. No, we kind of dug into this idea of dogs and how people in those times, like, not a lot of good experiences with dogs. They were just
pets.
These pack animals. They were howling. They were annoying. They were vicious. They were territorial. And so he's saying that about these guys, and it's like, oh, yeah, he knew exactly. Mutilator's not a friendly term. He's like all that. And so, yeah, when I was thinking about this question, this idea of like all things garbage, it's one of those... It's something I think I'm kind of afraid to ask myself. At Rogue River talked about this idea where Paul's not saying Christ needs to be the most valuable thing in your life. He needs to be the only valuable thing in your life. Compared, everything compared to him. And so I asked myself, if I have a shelf on my wall, God is up on that shelf. What else is up on that shelf? And do we ever live in these lives where it's like, yeah, there's 6 things up on that shelf right now with God. They're pretty much even with them. But God loves me. Like, we'll figure it out. I almost wonder if sometimes we're just a little too, I don't know.
Too easy on ourselves.
Yeah, too easy on ourselves.
Hard on other people and easy on ourselves. That's usually what we do.
Right, yeah. Or even, again, this is kind of getting to a little bit of, I don't want to get into a legalistic mindset, but you ever ask yourself the question, like, are you going to get up to heaven and God's like, hey, there's a lot of things you gave a green light on that you really shouldn't have. Like you're in, but you really you loaded a lot more on there that should have been. It's just one of those questions I ask myself, but then it's like, man, am I even prepared to get the answer to that question?
That's interesting.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that before?
It's a big question, man. I think, can I give a resource right now?
I would love it.
That might be good. So there's a book written. I think when we're talking about Paul, he's a very interesting man. Like, he has a lot of very fascinating character traits, and he has a very interesting role in culture. And a book that does a really good job of describing who he is a book titled Paul, and it's written by N.T. Wright. And it's kind of like his magnum opus. It's his life's work. It's an incredible book, and it does a wonderful job of describing the way he was. And so when he says garbage, when he talks in very strong language, there's some context as to why he had that disposition. You kind of get a peek behind the curtain is why was Paul this way? How did he get away with using such harsh language? Why did people respect him when he came down so harshly on them? Because for a lot of people, harsh language is kind of repugnant and repulsing. It's or whatever that word is. And they push away from it. They're like, I don't like that. That's uncomfortable. But Paul used that kind of language frequently, and they trusted and respected him. And so all that goes to say, really good book, Paul, N.T. Wright. It's very thick, but it's super solid.
All right. So there you go, a little bonus feature. Hope you had your pens and papers out.
Yeah, or listen to it on Audible. I have it on Audible. It's really good.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we're going from context to conviction to the other big C, circumcision.
Wow.
That was, we're not just talking about it just to talk about it.
That was great.
But it was, I know, I had that one cooking up in my head for quite a while.
No, that was good, Tim. That's why you're the guy, man. That's why your face is on a cup and ours isn't. Right?
Because I can bring in the word circumcision into any conversation.
Yeah. I'm just glad you didn't, cut this conversation off. I'm glad you kept it
we're going to get ourselves in some trouble if we go down that route. Yeah. But cut it out. You're fine. So the question I have for you, Austin.
What is circumcision?
No, we're not going that simple. Because, let's say this week you walked into church.
Yeah.
First time, you understand what circumcision is, right? So you have a general idea. But then you read this verse, and I wrote it down. So he says, "For we who worship by the Spirit of God are the ones who truly are circumcised. We rely on what Christ Jesus has done for us." I think in other translations he says we are the circumcision.
Mm-hmm.
Man, if that doesn't get unpacked for you, it's kind of a weird. You know what circumcision is. And then you're like, we are the circumcision. It sounds like a bad gang name.
Well,
so I kind of want you to unpack, like, what is he meaning by this? We are the true circumcision.
Yeah.
We are truly
So
circumcised.
I think this idea of circumcision is one of those weird things that like the modern day 21st century church kind of like pulls back on and gets kind of weird on, because it does. I mean, it involves anatomy, right? And it involves parts in our society, human body parts in our society, where a lot of people will kind of move away from that and go, that's uncomfortable.
It's taboo.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But if we can get over that and actually kind of see it for what it is and kind of what it represents, and also where it comes from contextually, it's actually a very beautiful thing. So like, for example, understand circumcision. You have to go back to Abraham, and you have to go back to the Old Testament. You have to see the significance of it. Circumcision, and in that culture, bodily parts were, how do I say this? People saw them more often, I guess you could say. They were exposed.
What we would
more
think as
frequently.
desensitized, but it's not quite that, because it was just a norm.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, people bathing in the river together, you know, all that kind of stuff. And a sign that God's people were God's people was a removal of the foreskin, right? And that was a sign that the Jewish people, the Israelite nation, was set apart by God for God's purposes. And so when you look at Paul talking about circumcision, what he is saying is the Jews were circumcised in the flesh, and that was a sign that they were a part of God's nation. Well, you and I have been circumcised of the heart, meaning that we have something removed from us, which signifies that we're a part of God's kingdom. God's taken our sin upon himself. He's removed that from us and called us his own. And so it really is a beautiful tie-in. And it's, like I said, it's kind of a weird thing to talk about because it is somewhat taboo, but it's an incredible picture because it's the removal of skin back then that was a sign that they were God's people. And for us, we are the circumcision. It's the removal of not of our skin, but of our sin that we are God's people. And so it's an incredible picture. It's a sign that we are God's chosen people. We are his children. Just like the nation of Israel walked with him, saw a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke, so too we are God's people. And so it's kind of a taboo thing. It's kind of a weird thing to talk about. But if we get over it and, quit being second graders and kind of see for what it really is a very cool concept that paints an incredible picture of what God has done for us and who we are to God. And also, mind you, the people in that context in the church in Philippi, they wouldn't have taken this as a weird thing.
Right. And that's I think, something that's really good to remember that, we started with this as taboo. It's not a thing back then.
It wouldn't have weirded them out. This would have been an analogy, pastors, teachers, preachers, whatever. We use a lot of analogies to describe something. That's what Paul's doing here. He's like, this is a picture from the Old Testament, and this is kind of what it means now for us. It was a way of describing the removal of sin of our hearts that were put on the cross and then called a child of God. And so it's an incredible picture.
Yeah. Well, so they wouldn't have been weirded out. They would have been enthralled. They would have been wowed because this is a radical concept.
Totally.
Right. I mean, this is the changing of this law that the ancestors had known. And so this is the forefront. I don't even know what to say, but
Well, and there are references to circumcision of the heart in the Old Testament, and I was thinking of Jeremiah. Toward the end of chapter 9 refers to that, and how, that God kind of indicting those that are circumcised only in the flesh and not also in their heart. And so that would have been a concept that they would have had heard of before. And I think too it ties back to verse 2, where Paul is calling out the Judaizers, and one of the things they wanted was for the Gentile Christians to be circumcised. They were very adamant about that, and Paul was very vehemently opposed to that. And so I think this whole, again, you read it, it's one continuous letter, one continuous really kind of conversation and thought that Paul's having here. And so remembering that too, that they would have read it all in one sitting, and they would have understood kind of the background context of it as well.
The other kind of maybe the application side of this again is somewhat fascinating, but when you look back at that culture and the understanding that the physical marked something different in you as a person, which was readily exposed to the public, it's also kind of an interesting thing when you kind of apply it to now. Can people outwardly see something different about you?
Really good.
So like they would have known, hey, that person's circumcised. They're of Israel. Like they're the Yahweh's God, Jehovah's God. Well, same thing is kind of true for us. Can people look at us and say something's been cut out of their life, something's been removed from them, something's been bestowed upon them that is different, that's unique, that's really cool. And it again, talking about circumcision, it's a weird thing, but it it's such a good picture. It's such a good picture of the gospel. It really is.
That's a really great point, Austin, just that question. Now I'm thinking of what does it look like to be circumcised in your heart?
Yeah.
That what does that look like outwardly?
Yeah.
So.
One last second grader comment. Can the world see your circumcision? I mean, like, that's
There
that's
you
a
go.
thought, but
Yeah, Christian t-shirt. Let's sell that in the lobby next week.
yeah, no, but yeah, sorry, I had to get that out. But you make a great point, and you put it into words, because as you were talking about that 3 or 4 minutes ago, I was trying to think in my head, like, trying to word it as you did. But yeah, can they literally see what is different about you?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the times it's a TBD. Like, we don't, it's hard to tell at first.
Yeah.
So
I will say, can I share just a little tiny
Please.
funny story? So Maddie and I, we just were in Hawaii, and when we came back, and it was interesting when Maddie and I traveled together. It's kind of fun. We try to pinpoint people that we think like, oh, they're probably a Christian or maybe not.
okay, all right.
Well, when we were in Hawaii, there was one person in particular that we were around, and we're like, this person, they've got to be a follower of Jesus. Like, they just have to. And sure enough, they were. And it was fun because when we were talking to them, it was like, hey, are you a Christian? Yeah, I can tell. It's just cool because I don't know what it was. It was like an energy. It was like a presence with that person, the way that they treated other people. It was just kind of undeniable. As a Christian, I just saw something in them that was different. And it was like, there's something different about you. And it's just cool. Like, it kind of made me think, as Maddie and I do that as we go around different places and we look at people in airports. It's like, man, I wonder if people do that to us.
Yeah.
I wonder if other Christians from Montana see us and go, they got the light of Jesus in them or not. I don't know.
Cool.
Kind of a cool thing.
I bet other people do that. Now it breaks my heart that I've never been asked that question in an airport. No, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll remember that.
He was a tour guide.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. And you asked him, and he said he was, and
Yeah.
cool. That's fun. All right, well, the final C of the day, confidence, and we're going to you on this one, Michelle. So, yeah, obviously he says have no confidence in the flesh, no confidence in our human effort. But I think as we grow up as kids, like, we're told to have confidence in ourselves and have a good self-esteem. So I want you to kind of create that line. What is the difference between having confidence that we would call as good, or putting confidence in ourselves where it's too much?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, just going back to the context of the passage that Paul is talking about, he's pushing back against these legalistic ideas that you can do something that will get you in with God. And so and he says all of that is worthless, that that Jesus is the only thing. And so I think confidence, if it's a self-righteous self-confidence, like God's gotta me and God are like this, and God's got it because I'm so great, then obviously that's not. But yeah, I think that we can certainly have confidence in things, in our abilities, recognizing that God gives us the abilities, though, that we have, the gifts that we have, and our inclinations, towards things that are good and healthy. That those are from God, and yet they're still. I think we can be confident in our abilities to do. Otherwise I think it's a false humility, really,
Okay.
to, if you go too far the other way. I think, I actually, when I was younger, I struggled with the self-esteem, and even kind of for a while thought that was, that there should just be nothing to do with, the self at all. And I actually, at one point, the Lord kind of pointed out that kind of my anxieties and some of those kind of downplaying myself, that was actually kind of a form of pride too, because, it just
Like
comes back to,
Jesus doesn't want doormats, and when you're laying there being like, I'm a doormat, it's like, okay, no.
Yeah. So that was just something I had to learn when I was younger. But I again, just remembering the context here, that we don't want to put, in terms of our salvation or our relationship with God, we absolutely should only put our confidence in Christ. Okay. But just in terms of things that we're good at, I think it's okay. Again, recognizing that God gives us those gifts. But
yeah. So I'm going to spring this question on you guys, and it kind of along the lines of the what we do here on this earth. The question of maybe around the end of someone's life, man, they were such a good person. How could they go to hell? And so, kind of the question I want to ask you guys, and maybe even just equipping our listeners, is how have you guys ever had to navigate a conversation with somebody where it's like, man, they are such a good person. They're so nice. They're so sweet. But there's this known fact that maybe they didn't proclaim Jesus. And again, kind of a weird way to end the podcast maybe, because it's a little bit of a somber thought. But have you guys ever had to navigate that conversation with somebody? Just kind of, or do you approach it, or do you stay hands off with it when it's like?
Well, in light of what I just said about traveling, I was actually in the airport sitting in Seattle, and I was sitting next to a guy. He was 20 years old. He just got back from a visit. He was visiting a college down in California, and he was at Seattle, and he was going somewhere else, and we got down to chatting, and he asked me what I did, which is the worst question.
Oh, you know, it's yeah. Wait, were you sitting on the plane next to this guy, or was it
no?
Just
we were. I was eating a hamburger, and
Okay.
I had just got off the plane, and
Got you during the meal.
Yep, there during a layover, and we got talking, and he asked me what I did, and I said, I'm a pastor. Don't hold it against me. No. And he's like, oh, that's cool. He's like, what religion? I said, well, I'm a Christian, and he goes, oh, that's cool. He's like, I'm good with God. He's like, I'm good with God. I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I went to Catholic school growing up. He's like, my family, real good people. My parents are married. I think I'm good with God. I'm like, okay, interesting. Just based on your own like works, essentially? And he goes, yeah, like that's what it takes. I'm like, well, not really, man. I'm like, the Bible says that we're all sinners and we fall short of God's glory, and that all our righteous deeds are but like filthy rags. It's like we can never do enough to earn his salvation. And it was an interesting discussion. I wish I could say he was converted and believed right there, but he wasn't.
Seeds were planted, though.
I'm hoping seeds were planted, but it's an interesting question, because I do think that mindset of what you just described is more prevalent than we think, even inside of the church. And like, you wonder how many people equate their spiritual standing with God on how much money they give, how much their tax write-off is, how much they read their Bible, and or how much they listen to a good podcast once a week. And that's such a trap. That is such a trap, because the truth is that in those kind of conversations, in my mind, we have to be truthful and loving and tell them that all of your righteous deeds are filthy rags, and there's nothing that you can do to earn your salvation. And because of that, the just result from a perfect God is hell. It's separation from him. That's why you need to quit relying on yourself and rely on Jesus. And it sounds bullish, but that's the most loving thing you can do to someone, is tell them that you're not going to be able to do it. You can't do it. It's impossible for you to do it. And so Jesus did it for you. Just believe, accept him, trust him, let him save you completely, and then you'll be all right. You know? But no, I think those kind of conversations have to take place, and the most unloving thing that we as Christians can do is not answer truthfully.
Yeah. It's just a tough pill to swallow when the atheist humanitarian has maybe done more than your whole life group has for the community. And again, that's not what it's about. But for somebody to like look at that and be like, how are you, who somebody might see a Christian as judgmental, like, how are you going to heaven? But that person who gave up everything, like, they're going to hell. So I agree with what you said. And this is one of those conversations we can go in circles in, but it can be a hard pillow sometimes.
You said atheist. You said atheist humanitarian. That's, I was actually just reading a fascinating study which actually talked about how people who don't believe in God are not as charitable as people who do have a higher purpose and meaning. So an atheist humanitarian could be viewed as an oxymoron, because they do live for self. They don't have something to live for other than themselves. Like, the reason, hopefully, that we do good, that we strive for something other than ourselves, is because we believe there's something above us, that there's something to strive for. I know, that's just a side point.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here, lots of thoughts, I guess. I mean, I think a lot of times Christians, though, in those conversations can come across as very unloving. Mm-hmm. And so I think I've heard it said that people, from people outside the church, that they love Jesus, but they don't like the church, that they don't like Christians. And so I think that's just something, maybe even going back to, point or question 2 that we talked about. It's like, what is it that we're, are we self-righteous? What are we, proud of that we shouldn't be? And are we loving? And are we looking out for social justice issues and things like that mean something to God? Those things are important. And even in that passage in Jeremiah that I mentioned earlier, chapter 9, he talks about that. It says that he talks about, not boasting in your own wisdom and strength and riches, but let the one who boasts about this, that they have the understanding to know me, that I am the Lord who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth, for in these I delight, declares the Lord. So as Christians, then we need to evaluate ourselves and say, well, am I representing those things? If people are surprised to hear that I'm a Christian, or if a third party looks on and sees that, sees the Christian and we're the grumpy one, and then there's this non-Christian and they're loving and generous, well, then there's a problem. So
Yeah.
No, that's great.
No, that's that, again, I think this is, in this current cultural time that we're living in, it is, we were actually just talking about this in our campus meeting. I think one of the most difficult things for the Christian community is understanding how to manage the tension between truth and love, and understanding that they both matter incredibly to God, and that we must try to navigate in the middle. We must try to use both in perfect unison, because you do have some people that in their pursuit of love say, you're going to be all right. Like all religion, the classic one is all religions lead to heaven. It's just like one big mountain, pick your path, and eventually you'll get there if you're good enough. Like, it's a load of garbage. Like, that's not loving. That's hateful. That's legitimately hateful, because if you really do believe that Jesus is the only way to salvation, but then you refuse to tell someone that it's through faith alone, grace alone, in Christ alone, well, then that's not loving. That is hateful. We have to be willing to say what is truthful, in a way that is also loving, in accordance with the way that Jesus would act and carry himself. And so it's an interesting kind of, I don't want to say cultural time we're living in. I guess you could say that. But again, just finding that tension between how to handle truth and how to handle love, and not compromising truth in favor of love, and not being loving because you're just all about truth.
right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe even, I think it's going to be different in different situations. So really just praying each time and being sensitive to the Spirit. And if you look at both Paul and with Jesus, it wasn't this cookie cutter interactions with every single person, Jesus especially. And he was so, would ask questions and draw people out, and he would seem harsh with this person, and with someone else, just, just different. And so I think we just need to understand that too, that we're stepping into, when we interact with someone, that the Spirit is, hopefully we're noticing the Spirit's prompting and realizing that we're stepping into something that is already God's mission, and he's already been working on it. And so maybe there's just this moment, like this opportunity you had in the airport to talk to this young man. Well, that, you just stepped into something that God was already doing.
Sure.
And then someone else may come along later and add more to that. And so just knowing that, just not, I just think we need to be careful not to have just some sort of carbon copy cookie cutter approach.
You remind me, what you just said reminded me so much of our God Space series that we did. What was that, like a year and a half ago?
Yeah, it seems like we always go back to that on this podcast, because it was just such a good series. It comes up a lot because it was just so relevant.
Well, it's like, it's very practical, right? It's like noticing. I remember teaching on noticing. It was like, noticing is such an idea that you don't really think about, but when you just have your lenses on to just notice things, it's like God really does do a lot, like listening, asking good questions, or just being willing to have conversation. It is remarkable the way that God uses us in different situations that call for completely different responses, and the way that discernment plays a role in that. Because for some people, maybe a more heavy-handed, I don't even want to say heavy-handed, but maybe a more direct response would be how God would have it be communicated to them. But maybe other people, it would be more of the gentle and lowly, meek discussion that could really till their hearts in a powerful way, which would lead them to repentance. So,
yeah. Speaking of noticing, I noticed something. You and I travel very differently, because you're out here playing Where's Waldo with Christians you're having these deep conversations over a hamburger.
Oh, no. I know. You should you should definitely not think about that. That was like, I was I will say I am probably a bad traveler, because I had my headphones in listening to way too many things. Granted, the people sitting next to you also, you can tell when someone sits down and wants to have a conversation.
Oh, of course,
headphones go right on.
Yeah, exactly. You get your chair first, they come down, headphones on, the mask
book open,
goes on. It's like, all right, they don't want to talk. But I kind of felt like maybe I was that person a little bit this trip.
It's all right. You're memorable. But
yeah.
As we're probably nearing that 40-minute mark of the podcast, I see a stack of books, which means it is time for our Keep Digging, some resources. So I think I encouraged you guys resources on Philippians or even just knowing Christ. Let's see what you got in that stack.
Yeah, well, I won't go through them all necessarily specifically, but I did bring a couple that were more like for spiritual disciplines, because I think, at least for me, growing up in just non-denominational, evangelical churches, that a lot of the spiritual disciplines just got sort of left by the wayside. I think some of the Orthodox churches are better at that. So, on Amazon, you can pick up like these, not this one necessarily specifically, but little book. This little one is on the Examen. So just that prayer method from St. Ignatius. So that's a popular one, and it's just a really good way to get focused. Or there's this book on Sanctuary of the Soul, A Journey into Meditative Prayer by Richard Foster. Thomas Kelly's A Testament of Devotion, which is a classic Christian, just kind of devotional, again, kind of more spiritual discipline, connecting with God. But the one I think I really want to point out, which would be more for the women, so ladies watching, is this one by Ruth Haley Barton. You can see that. It is called Longing for More. And she writes this directly to women, but the subtitle is A Woman's Path to Transformation in Christ. And anyway, it's a great book. And some of the chapters, a couple of them maybe address specific seasons in life. So like, for instance, there's a chapter on motherhood. So I feel like, ladies, if you pick up the book, you wouldn't necessarily read it from start to finish. You might kind of find the chapters that would speak to you. And then at the end of each of those, she gives like some exercises, some things to reflect on, or, kind of some prayer stuff. But yeah, just getting that focus on the relationship side with the Lord. So getting to know Jesus. So
awesome. Well, that's a good start for sure. That's a good start and a finish.
Yeah.
Got anything to add to that?
I kind of I jumped the gun a little bit.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. You gave us a little teaser.
Yeah.
Which I completely regret now, because now I feel like I'm here empty-handed.
Oh, yeah. And if somebody just were to come to the Keep Digging part of this podcast,
I look like a fool.
You're just, a hooligan.
Just, again, say that book on Paul is really good. Not necessarily anything. Well, okay, I'll say this. Going on right now in our school district and in our areas, there's a lot of stuff about, parents and education and all that kind of stuff. Very interesting book that I've kind of jumped into is a book by C.S. Lewis called The Abolition of Man. Mm-hmm. And he discusses a lot of issues that are relevant now then, and has a really good perspective on it. And so kind of maybe zooming out of Philippians 3 a little bit, and maybe going to more kind of what's going on culturally in our own time as far as politically. C.S. Lewis has a really great book, Abolition of Man. It's very small. You can read it in one sitting, and pretty good.
Cool. In contrast to the very big book that you mentioned earlier. So
Yes.
A little bit of everything for everyone.
Yeah, it's a fun size and then a family size. So,
all right.
Are there any Philippians commentaries? And I would ask this of you too, Tim, because you guys are both teaching out at
honestly, the one that you have underneath the Ruth Haley Barton.
I'm going to be honest.
Is that one that you have?
Yeah. I'm going to be honest. Pretty much most times I'm on here, I feel like I share the same one. I think I've already said that one.
Oh, no. Yeah, you totally have.
Yeah.
You have like 5 or 6 books, and then your commentaries are either like, they're literally called Philippians or they're called Paul.
Yeah.
And, that one, and then Philippians for you.
Yeah, Philippians for you. I mean,
something we've been sharing back and forth.
Okay. Yeah.
Good stuff.
That's good. So, well, speaking of good stuff, this podcast was good stuff. Thank you guys so much.
Happy birthday, Mom.
Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you're enjoying it. And listeners, we will catch you guys next week.
Buy extra expensive food from Tim.
He's paying. Hi, Grandma Ruth.
Yes, hi, Grandma Ruth. All right.